I'm not, actually. But welcome to Spoken Traditions of Appalachia. This is an event that came about because of a connection that I had within campus activities and really wanted to bring in a lot of storytelling and spoken performance to App's campus and the Appalachian region, because that's a strong piece of this area that we are situated in, and we want to make sure that we are recognizing that and bringing awareness to that. Please, come on in. So App Speaks, the communications club on campus, partnered with campus activities and specifically the Heritage Council of Apps, the Appalachian Popular Programming Society, to put on this event and situate it within Heritage Week as well, when we are making sure we are recognizing, examining, and celebrating the Appalachian heritage that is so central to this region. Tonight we're going to hear from a couple different speakers. We have two student speakers, Joshua Khalsa and Hannah Godfrey. Two professors, Ann Ward and Suzanne Samples, and then we have our keynote speaker, Joseph De Fante, who was the Poet Laureate in 2012-2014. And at the end, Catherine Ledford will be facilitating a Talkback Panel and contextualization of these topics and how they are situated within Appalachia and how the region has influenced these speakers. So thank you all for joining us this evening. First up, we'll have Joshua Khalsa. He is a poet living and working in Boone, North Carolina. He's recently graduated with his MFA from Hunter College, and he has received a few unsubstantial awards, has published poems in a few unsubstantial journals, and in his spare time enjoys Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, expensive coffee, and cheap beer. So please welcome Joshua Khalsa.
First one is called Death of Nashville Truck. Held up by two men, robbery victim, dies of wounds. Shot 4 times, 69 years old. Farmer, veteran, brutally shot down. I expected to read in cold blood, but the True Detective magazine article stops short of only mostly cliche. Can anybody hear me? I'm just going to project. Stop short of only mostly cliche. The plucky old man, father of 5, one son, Norburn Hyatt, my grandfather, walked bleeding to his truck, drove home, and called the cops, calmly waited for the ambulance. He was working in his vibrant patch of red peppers when the 2 young men approached, waving guns, demanding cash. William Lane Hyatt waved back with his gardening hoe and fought wildly, and got himself shot 4 times at 69 in 1962. In the hospital, a squat Buncombe County sheriff asked all the questions. Don't worry about finding them. I know who they are, and I'll handle them myself. When I get well, I will tend to the matter myself. The spry old farmer persisted. A month of moldering in a sterile bed finished him off, and the death of one Mr. William Lane Hyatt precluded any reprisals. Going over the articles, I saw my great-grandfather under an unclever headline in the black and white, but not as a lean farmer only who fought 2 burglars, took 4 bullets, and died. He grew strawberries, tomatoes, and peppers, drove a truck to local markets, supported his family, loved in the aloof and tender way of old men. 2 generations still talk about him, live on his land. I walk in the fields at dusk, lightning bugs spotting the trees, and snag in my hands a tuft of hay. The wiring is tough and yielding as I pluck it apart, let it fall to the earth. That one was about my great-grandfather, and now I'm going to read one about my grandfather. This one's called Pockets. We've emptied the dead man's closet. Shoes in rows, gone. Charity, one or two kept. I took his boots, loafers a size too big. Shirts tossed, formal jackets, 2 tuxedos, coats, scarves, hats, and windbreakers. But in pockets stuffed in bunches, there'd be paper towels. He hadn't kept a handkerchief in years, so always, ball after ball, were wadded these white lumps. There was one the other morning in a jacket I'd saved. White ruffled clump I remember he'd used, sneezing in the truck, or offered after lunch, crumbs or mustard staining the edges of my mouth, beard when I was older. And refusing never stopped him asking, pulling a wad out silently, motioning with a single wrist thrust across table or truck console, a sly smile or chuckle at my waving him off, using instead sleeve or bare hand. Later, deeper in backpacks, we found and arranged on the floor his readiness: tape, rope, first aid kits, filling plastic bags, extra hooks packed for fishing trips, and line, maps, ponchos, crackers, and Vienna sausages. He planned for the two of us, really wanted to share. A space always for what we needed. My grandfather ready with a kindness tucked in pockets. The third one is called Posts. And it's a poem about, I don't know if you guys have ever done any fencing work, but it's the worst. My mom and I were having to do fencing work all around our property, and so it's just a story of us getting those posts in. We beat them in the wet ground, long-necked, green and white. The posts stand against the moldy wooden forerunners, shaped and put up over half a century ago by my great-grandfather, or maybe one of his workers as he looked on. Definitely looked on, at least. The same overseer's need so natural in my grandfather, who never left me alone to mow or saw or put up fences until age caught him up and kept him away. They're nearly falling over, held up by roots grown around them, or stubbornness, inherited maybe from the same old men, if, like I believe, the land becomes us, loved or ignored. We wrap strands of barbed wire around the new posts, binding them to the old like a crutch, down the line as necessary where age or trees have toppled the gray, popped columns. My mother and I, in silent rhythm, down the line, take from the back of the four-wheeler each upright length of ribbed metal, unspooling as we go more wire. The joints in my hands ache from twisting, here and there bleeding. I wear no gloves, too thick, less nimble than fingers. We relearn boundaries, remembering to ourselves different lives worth of time spent walking the hills, the forest view now bald in winter, alone with hammer and stepladder, stumbling in brambles, cursing occasionally, nearly nailing fingers, or once glancing my mother's head, missing wildly from the ladder's step, hemming back nature with hammer and axe, with diligence, together with the silent miles. This next one is called Martha and Tudor. It's about my mother's first 2 chickens that she owned. She named them after my grandmother and my great aunt. So, Martha and Tudor. Wedged between a pair of stairway pillars in the backyard of our house, a few yards from the beehives and hive fence, in the middle of an untended garden, my mother built a chicken coop, where 2 hens clucked pettily over corn, produced few eggs, and painted the coop white. She named them Martha and Tudor after her mother and aunt, and they bickered like old ladies, but lived comfortably, squat between the stairway pillars, a few yards from the dangerous bees, and lost in a tangle of garden brambles. An inside joke. My mother never called them chickens, only Martha and Tudor. And the longer both pairs lived, the more similar they became, clucking and scraping at corn or gossip, which led to confusion one afternoon when through a message I learned how Martha and Tudor were eaten by coyotes, who leapt one night over the high fences, past hordes of swarming bees and a mesh of garden weeds, under stairs and two concrete pillars, and burrowed under chicken wire to enjoy two old birds sleeping unruffled in their beds. All right, I got one more for you guys. And this one is, this last one is pretty close to my heart. It's called Horses. It's about a story my grandfather told me about him and his older brother. His older brother died very young, but they used to break horses together, and then they used to go out to the barn and break the horses. And he always said his brother was much better at breaking horses than he was. And my grandfather died recently, last summer, so I've been obviously a lot of my poetry has been reflecting that. So this one's called Horses. 1. They spent the day breaking horses, he and his brother. His brother the natural with a broom handle, wielding with a little magic, slightly sinister, from mountains. So they finished the job in an afternoon and walked the beasts from the barn, and climbing, posed on them for the picture posted on a shelf years later beside grandchildren, holding caught bass and snapping turtles. The brothers, my grandfather and great uncle, looked brave in black and white, animals calm under their weight, nosing the air, curious, maybe, at their new condition. 2. Death is like that. Maybe walking out from some dark enclosure into the sun, renewed, changed, unaware of what you were just before, some carefree animal serving new purpose, not your own, higher, maybe. But what do we walk out into? I guess it doesn't matter much, as we follow after one another into some new greenness of purpose, led by angels maybe, slightly sinister in their power, as we pose and smile. 3. They're all dead, men and horses, graying to their end like the photograph, faster than its remembrance of them. The barn's here, and I remember when my grandfather pointed to the place where they walked in with the reluctant horses and walked them out again. He would pause and smile, and die a little in that moment. That's a way of saying it. As the sun caught him up, and he became frozen in another place, like he was all along visiting his brother in that moment, and didn't belong here, but did his best to keep up appearances for the rest of us. He longed to be there with his brother, still as boys, and lives there now, having walked from the barn at last, broken and renewed. Thanks.
Thank you, Joshua. So now we're going to have, in between speakers, we're going to have Matt Richards come up, the advisor for App Speaks. So we're going to give us a little bit of context about that group. So in between each speaker, we'll have a little bit more about the various sponsors that have helped to contribute to this event. So Matt Richards.
So I was just told I was going to do this like 3 seconds ago. So App Speaks is the wonderful student organization that puts this and a number of other events together. This is our first year doing this particular event. In the spring, you'll find our flagship event, Panorama, which is a really large TED Talk-like event for students, where students get the opportunity to speak in front of a big group about the topics they're the most passionate about. We also have a number of events that happen through the semester. Socrates Cafe, which is an open forum for students to come discuss topics that are contemporary and pressing for whatever time we're talking. And we just organize lots of things. We have a good time. The group is growing. We have a lot of passionate students. So if you're remotely interested, please check with Ellie over here at the table. We can get you lots of information about the group. And just know that they're here and that they're organizing events and they're great people. Thanks so much.
Y'all can come in here. We don't want to leave y'all over in that corner. We have people joining late. Cool. So yeah, and Dr. Richards mentioned TEDx, which is a great segue into our next speaker, Hannah Godfrey. She's a senior student at App State, and she's also one of the curators of TEDx Appalachian State University. She actually got it initiated on App's campus. So we are honored to have her here and honored that she has brought that wonderful program to our campus. She is part of the Army ROTC group on campus, which a lot of her stories actually reflect the training and experiences she has had there. And she hopes to go to a Fulbright scholarship, but whether or not she does receive that, she's eager for the stories to come. So please welcome Hannah Godfrey.
Thank you, guys. How are you this evening? So perhaps I have a little bit more stories than the rest of our speakers this evening.
Like Jake said, I did get to go around all this summer, and I think I learned a little bit of myself in each place that I went to. And something I've been interested in particularly recently is the moments when something maybe
of like in Harry Potter when there's a basilisk loose in the castle and they put everyone in the grand hall for sleeping that night. It was like that. We shoved like 150 cadets in this tent, and we were, pretty cramped, but we had, enough space. We go out to have a call for fire class, which is this task where you call in for our indirect artillery fire. We had our test on it the next day, and we were going to do a class quickly in the evening because the weather was actually clearing up at this point. And our platoon leader at the time, this is another cadet who was just chosen for a leadership position. He comes up to us during this class that we're having, and he says, "All right, guys, Frago, that is a fragmentation order, a change to the original plan." And he says, "We have to go back to that same patrol base." And we all thought he was kidding. I thought he was kidding up until the very last second I put my ruck on, and we rucked a mile back to that patrol base. And then we went to sleep, and at 2 a.m., it's raining, there's thunder, there's lightning, it's getting worse and worse, and we hear a cadre yell, "Pack up all your shit! You got 5 minutes!" And we then are packing up all our gear, throwing it on, and rucking that same mile back to that tent where we slept until 5 the next morning. Now that was a miserable night. I can't tell you how detrimental it was for my platoon's camaraderie and morale. But looking back, it's just funny. I can't help but smile or laugh. And I think that it had the same effect for everyone in my platoon. Because not only did it make us hate each other and everyone around us, it made us really, really bonded as well. So in addition to getting to travel to Fort Knox for a little bit, after that I went to San Antonio for a month. I worked in the Brooke Army Medical Hospital there. And after that, I was tired of all the working that I was doing in the summer, so I was lucky enough to get to travel to Europe. It took 2 weeks, and I went through Iceland to Germany, and then Spain. And I have a poem for you guys in which each of those environments what kind of effect they had on me. My hands were rough in Kentucky, rubbed raw from clinging to my rifle, my skin weakened and saturated from rain. I never knew my skin could change so quickly, but then again, I learned a lot about myself in that field. My pupils were big in Texas. I mean, my pupils are always large, but this was even more than normal, and it was odd because I was usually squinting against this South Texas summer sun, and light was stuffed in every crevice of San Antonio. But I still found myself looking for more in the classrooms and hospitals. My hair grew more in the 3 days I spent in Reykjavik than the 2 months that preceded my arrival. And it could have been because of the goosebumps, but I'm inclined to believe my body was somehow physically expressing its newfound freedoms, letting go in unbelievable ways. I walked in shoes that weren't mine in Lüneburg, but they felt like mine. They were roughly my size, and they curled comfortably over these cobblestone streets, good for my long, lonesome strolls. I walked on streets that weren't mine in Lüneburg, but they felt like mine. I was wide awake in Spain, even though I got far too little sleep, partially because I was so concerned with watching my back on the streets of Madrid and Barcelona, but also because time just seemed to relent slightly. It didn't pass with the same rigor, and in Salamanca, morning hours would slip by, still lit up and warm. And as much as I love these fun, lighter stories, I also love the other side of them. I love the important lessons to be learned in the emotional and hurting part side of them. Because, I mean, even though I was able to joke with my mother about her cancer, I was also really, really scared at some points. In her recovery, she suffered from a lot of depression that all culminated in this moment when she attempted suicide. And I wrote this kind of trying to address this anger I felt towards her, this indignant sort of feeling in which I couldn't express it all because I was so worried about her well-being. Halos of light hung in the misty air around street lamps as my mom and I walked past all the little boxes made of ticky-tacky. 2 different sirens sang just beyond the white picket fences, and her heels click, click, clicked against the cement, and the raindrops clashed with their drip, drip, dripping. But my footfalls came silent, and my exhales remained unheard as I walked on my toes and alternated between biting my tongue and biting my lip. Because even though I was able to laugh with my friend about breaking her chili dish, I also sat with her for the next hour crying. And there's this last poem which I want to share with you, which I really didn't find a really great way to weave in, but I want you to know that I think it's the best poem I've ever written. And that's really why I'm sharing it with you, and because it is a very grief and anger-filled poem. I think that even though I live a really happy life, a really fulfilling life, and I have big goals and aspirations, I tell stories when those things happen. I can tell stories about all the interactions I've had where things have turned out all right in the end. But when I don't feel like I can share because they're too sad or too heartbreaking, I write my poetry. So this is about mainly violence against women and children. And I wrote this at a time in my life when I really didn't believe I would be as cavalier as the girl that I'm able to be now. And I didn't think I would be ever sharing it with anybody. On the day of my high school graduation, my dad gave me a gift, mace. When I asked why, he said statistics. 1 in 5 women are sexually assaulted in college, and you have this habit of wandering off by yourself, as if my exploratory nature were an excuse. Downtown Raleigh, 1 year later, I'm digging my fingernails into my hands as I watch the stairs in the reflection of the glass, a trick I learned a while ago when I was told looking over my shoulder was distrusting and therefore unfeminine. Half-moon indentations littered my palms. I walked alongside the boy who had a habit of turning whales into minnows. "What are you doing?" he asked. I didn't quite know. Well, of course they're staring, he said. "Look at what you're wearing." And I stayed silent, not because the tank top I had on was tight around my throat or the humidity had me choked, but because that's what we do. That's what we're taught to do, because out of every 1,000 women raped, 310 are reported to the police, 57 reports lead to an arrest, 11 cases are referred to prosecutors, 7 cases will lead to a felony conviction, 6 rapists will be incarcerated, but out of every 1,000 women raped, 994 perpetrators walk free. And how can we get help when the system is built against us? A system where women are told to wait, to stay, to hide, to cover, told to be silent, confused, and coerced. We've become part of the problem. Hindsight is 20/20, but my foresight is pretty damn good, and you will not put me in the ground until no does not mean convince me or I'm playing hard to get. I will not rest until people are held accountable for their actions, and the pervasive and somehow pernicious violence against women is not passively and widely accepted. And when I go to parties and I get the question, "Why do you have a knife on you?" I won't answer statistics. As many as 1 in 4 men will commit acts of sexual abuse. And I do have a habit of fighting back. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Hannah. So next, we're going to have Crystal and Bubba Pfeffer, chair people of the Heritage Council for APPS, the Appalachian Popular Programming Society, to talk about that and to talk about Heritage Week as well. So.
All right, so we are the co-chair people of Appalachian Heritage Council, a part of, as you said, APPS. We program events on campus throughout the year. Our largest event is the Fiddlers Convention in February. And this week, we're partnering with App Speaks for this event, and then a total of 6 other events, one that we had last night that Crystal will tell you about.
So last night we had Appalachian poets, and if you don't know who they are, Frank X. Walker, the founder, was our keynote speaker. And tonight we're partnering with App Speaks for this awesome event. Tomorrow, if you're interested, we're having an environmental justice talk in Beacon Heights of the Plymouth Student Union from 6 to 8. Thursday, we'll be having a talk with Boone's Junaluska community in Whitewater Lounge, also in the Plymouth Student Union, from 4 to 6. And then Friday, we'll be having a handmade market which will be in the International Hallway of the Student Union. And we're ending the week with a costume square dance from 8 to 10 in Legends.
Thank y'all so much. Next up, we have Ann Ward, an assistant professor in the Department of Communication, and by her own label, an accidental Appalachian. She was from the Midwest, has moved here, and has talked a lot about how moving here, she had to change a lot of her views around Appalachia. So we're excited to have her here, and we welcome her to the stage.
Appalachian State University. That's it back there. We heard the Michigan game, and it was Appalachian. I said, I'm not moving to Appalachia, and he obviously convinced me otherwise, and so that was in 2011, and I've been here ever since. I didn't really want to move here because Appalachia, as we all know, is filled with hillbillies and crackers and rednecks and people that are unsavory. But I'm here. And when I moved here, I discovered that Appalachia is not necessarily filled with just icky people that we saw in Deliverance. It's actually filled with regular people. It's a place where people have, where people with money plop down money for a second home, you know, and it's a place where we have a really fabulous state university, and we were talking about the students who come up here. We have great students at Appalachian State University, and their families who've recently moved here, like myself. They're families who've been here for many, many generations who don't ever want to leave. They find everything that they need here in this particular community, and there is no reason to leave. So since I moved here in 2011, I've discovered it is a place people move to, not just flee from. When I tell people that, people say, well, you know, Boone's not necessarily the real Appalachia. It's not really where we define Appalachia. And my question for those people are like, well, why do we only define Appalachia by its poorest regions or its most crippling stereotypes? And I really, coming from Chicago, I should have known not to trust the stereotypes of Appalachia. I come from the most stereotyped city in America. It is the murder capital of the world, as you all know, and that's actually not true. If you look at data, Detroit is worse, Memphis is worse, and a whole bunch of other cities have a far worse murder rate than Chicago. But it's very violent, and we all know that. The president talks about that all the time. Some of my students, they've actually wondered how I lived to tell the tale of how I got here, because Chicago is so murderous. You know, I've lived in the city for 20 years. I never actually saw anybody get murdered. I never knew a murderer until I actually moved to Appalachia. And then somebody was guiding our horse tour, and he ended up being arrested and convicted of murder later. And it took moving to Appalachia to find the murder person. You know, and being from Chicago, you know, I would go visit my relatives in Ireland. My mother was Irish. We would go visit the Dubliners, and people would come up to us and go, "Hey, Chicago, bang bang Al Capone." You know, and we're like, my dad was just so insulted because he grew up in Chicago and Al Capone had been dead for decades. And we're like, wait a minute, why is Al Capone still defining what Chicago is? And of course, I moved to Appalachia, and what do we have? We have Capone's Pizza, right? And still, we have the murderous mobsters now defining what we eat, and it's pizza. And I will tell you, it's pretty good pizza, but it's not Chicago pizza. And they have, I was just there yesterday, I was at the movies the other day, and they have the most gigantic picture of Al Capone here in Appalachia celebrating their pizza. So enjoy. But it is not Chicago pizza. So now, since moving here, and since I've discovered that Appalachia is clearly not what I thought it was going to be, I've wondered why. Why is it that every story I've ever read about Appalachia is a horror story? I mean, it's really bad. I've never read a positive story about this region ever. So I kind of wanted to talk about three powerful stories. You know, I think that, you know, the 2016 election, all the journalists came to Trump country, which was Appalachia, to find out why people are voting for Appalachia. There was one Vanity Fair article where they opened at 2 a.m. a strip bar in West Virginia. And my question is like, why a strip bar? Why 2 in the morning? Why not go to church on Sunday and ask the evangelicals, why are they supporting Trump? It just seems like we frame Appalachia as a place full of losers. And I hate that. It really bugs me. So I've been thinking about what are the stories that made me think of Appalachia as being this horror place. And there are 3. 2 happened before I moved here, and 1 happened since in 2016. One story is Deliverance. I don't know if you've seen it. It is a book and a movie. The book was written by James Dickey. He was the poet laureate of the United States in 1966, and he wrote one of the most shocking and violent movies about this region ever. He was born and raised in Atlanta, and he wrote a story about 4 Atlanta men who go into, the suburbanites, who go into Appalachia, the hills, the mountains, and they encounter really awful people. And as the trailer said, these are the men who decided not to go play golf that weekend. They go down the river and they test themselves. They nearly die. The actors who played the roles actually nearly died too. Burt Reynolds broke a bone in one of the scenes. But they, so in the book and in the movie, they encounter strange and alien Appalachian people who live outside of normal, traditional American norms. In the book, the narrator is named Ed. He's played by John Voight. He asks Lewis, who's played by Burt Reynolds, what to expect from the Appalachian people. And this is what Lewis tells him. These are good people, Ed, but they're awfully clannish. They're set in their ways. They'll do what they want to do, no matter what. Every family I ever met up there has at least one relative in the penitentiary. Some are in for making liquor or running it, but most of them are in for murder. They don't think a whole lot about killing people up there. And so I'm like, wow, there's a whole region where they just kind of like Bang Bang Al Capone, they're just a bunch of murderers up here. And of course, in the book and in the movie, you discovered that the murderers are not the Appalachian hillbillies. They're actually the Atlanta suburbanites who go up and they end up murdering people. It gave us the movie itself. The movie was picked by, it's included in the US National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. And so I think clearly there's a cultural need to make Appalachia be awful. It gave us the image of the inbred hillbilly banjo boy. His name was Billy Redden. He was 15 when he was hired. And he was not mentally or physically impaired. They just liked the look of him. He also couldn't play banjo. So they just hired him because they liked the look of him. Because, as they said in the movie, he looked like he had genetic deficiencies. So Deliverance did for the hillbilly what Jaws did for the great white shark. It made the hillbilly something horrifying and terrifying and something to avoid at all costs. Obviously they don't think a whole lot about killing people up here, which I think is kind of an interesting statement. And in the end, of course, the men who murder and get away with it are the Atlanta suburbanites. I also want to talk about Harlan County, USA, because it gave me, it's an Academy Award-winning documentary about Appalachia. It covered a coal strike in 1976. And for me, it gave me the impression that all of Appalachia is just about coal. All they do is coal. They're dust-covered coal people. The documentary filmmaker Barbara Koppel came from Scarsdale, New York. She was extremely wealthy, came and decided to do a documentary on the coal miners. She was an outsider. There's no narration in the movie. And there's really just visual images of shacks and people who are poor and people who are struggling to make it in a town that is owned by the coal company. And you'll find out also that in 1974 in Harlan County, Kentucky, Duke Power Company provided homes for people that did not have running water or indoor plumbing. And I think that's really remarkable. We created the interstate highway system in the 50s. We went to the moon in the 60s. And in 1970s, people still did not have running water in the coal company's towns, homes that they supplied for people. And so with Deliverance in Harlan County, we see that there's a history of exploitation in Appalachia. With Deliverance, the exploitation was actually from the filmmakers. Billy Redden, the 15-year-old, didn't get any money for that part. He's working at Walmart a couple years ago. And the dueling banjo soundtrack became very famous and popular and made a lot of money, but the actual person who wrote the song did not, he had to sue to get credits for it. And so they were actually going to take that song and not give him credit for it. And then also in 2016, after I moved here, I don't know if anybody's read Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. To me, I find that kind of an astonishing story. It's about a guy who grew up in a river town in Ohio, southwest corner of Ohio, elevation 656 feet, and he claims that hillbilly values are the thing that ruined his community. Well, he never lived in Appalachia. His mother never lived in Appalachia. His grandparents moved from Appalachia in the 40s, and yet he claims that hillbilly values are what ruined Middletown. Well, what ruined Middletown was the collapse of the steel industry. And the stories he tells there are about people who were devastated by the collapse of the steel industry, not necessarily hillbilly values. But he was able to sell it as, you know, this is what Hillbillies does. Here's from the review from an LA Times. Vance's unapologetic autobiography, Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a family and culture in crisis, is a poem to the hills and hollers of his childhood, where a blue-collar sentiment often blames government and big business for poverty, addiction, violence, and families in disarray. The New York Times says, Vance says economic insecurity accounts for only a small part of his community's problems. The much larger issue is hillbilly culture itself. I don't know how you can have hillbilly culture in a river town, you know, that's so far away. It's in Ohio. Yes, they have Appalachia in Ohio, but he never lived in Appalachia. And so when he describes hillbilly values as the reason for the failure for his community, he's just wrong. It's just simply wrong. He's the voice of the Rust Belt, and in that he's talking about the collapse of the manufacturing sector, he's actually talking about, he's giving a eulogy for the working class, not just for the hillbillies. So Appalachia really, it's when I started looking at Appalachia, it's home to more than 25 million people. 36,000 right now are coal miners. So of those 25 million people, a small fraction work in coal. There are 420 counties. Watauga County is one of them, spread across 13 states. Whenever I travel through the mountains to get back to Chicago, it takes hours to get out of the mountains. I always think as our car groans up a hill and down a hill, I think about the people who, the pioneers who climbed up here by foot or by horse. I don't know how they survived. There's a true resilience in the people who settled this area. But there's also still poverty. In Watauga County, 33% of school children today qualify for free or reduced fee lunches. And according to the Census Bureau, about 24% of the people in Watauga County are poor. So in 2011, I wanted nothing to do with moving to Appalachia. I'm so happy that we did. It is the place where I call home. I'm raising my children here. I was a band mom. I've been a lacrosse mom, a soccer mom, a swim mom, a cross-country mom here. And I've never really encountered any of the monsters that I've seen in Deliverance at all. And what I want you to think about when you hear, you guys can be evangelists for Appalachia. The stories that are told about Appalachia generally are not told by people who live here. And I do want you, if you hear that Appalachia is coal mining or that it's poor or that it's hillbilly or redneck or cracker, I want you to push back and say, no, actually Appalachia is university towns. It's second home markets because it's beautiful. It's a tourism mecca. We see that in Dollywood and Boone and Pigeon Forge. And it's far more than rednecks and hillbillies. And so when you hear people offer up stereotypes as fact, push back and actually look for the complexity in your community. And remember when people identify places as being just troubled, alien, poor, and full of losers, know that those places like Appalachia are home to millions of people. These Appalachian towns and counties that we talk about disparagingly, know that the people who live there are just as American as the people in the wealthiest communities. And I feel very blessed that I've had the opportunity to come and have my stereotypes displaced by the facts. So thank you very much for letting me share my Appalachian journey with you.
Thank you, Anne. So next up, we're going to bring Beth Holcomb to talk a little bit about campus activities. They are one of the sponsors of the event, and they oversee the Appalachian Popular Programming Society.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. Real quick, I just want to give it up for Jake, who had the vision and the wherewithal to put this event together for you. So my name is Beth Holcomb. I'm the Assistant Director of Campus Activities here at Appalachian. I work with all of the clubs and organizations, which is over 400. Our office also works with all of the Greek life and with all of the student programming. So everything from smaller events like spoken word, just like this, to the large concerts like the Avett Brothers came last semester. So yeah, I have a real privilege and really blessed to have that opportunity to work with all of the students in campus activities. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Beth. So next up we have Suzanne Samples. She is a professor in English at Appalachian State, and she has a book, Frontal Matter, Glue Gone Wild, a memoir about her diagnosis of terminal brain cancer. So here's Suzanne.
Thank you. Hello. Hello, thanks for coming out tonight. So I'm gonna be the NC-17 presenter. I'm gonna drop a few F-bombs in this reading, but just go with it. So I'm a lifelong Appalachian resident. So I've lived here and I grew up in West Virginia. And so my stories go from the beginning, middle, and sort of near the end of my memoir. It's kind of strange because it's like reading your diary to a group of strangers, but I'm gonna discuss some characters and some places in Appalachia that I encountered throughout this journey. The first one starts in Boone, North Carolina, Hatchet Coffee. Feeney and I had a misunderstanding. Feeney, my friend, my gym buddy, my confidant. I met Feeney through my roller derby team. Her quiet confidence, her genius in the kitchen, her willingness to help anyone in need, her terrible dad jokes, and her uncanny ability to react in medical emergencies made me smile and feel safe in her presence. My other teammates, some are here tonight, and I joked that her shoulders were so ripped they deserved their own Facebook page. Feeney and I were teammates, friends, and single women with dogs who did not really enjoy minding us or listening to our commands. We went to the gym together, enjoyed finding good food in Boone, and had deep conversations about how our love lives were complete shit, but maybe we weren't quite that old yet, so there might still be hope. But something went awry, something went weird. I hurt her because I said something I shouldn't have. I let my awkwardness take over when I should have stayed quiet and let the moment pass like another gust of wind down Boone, North Carolina's King Street during that record cold December. My questions now: can I blame that moment on my frontal lobe? Or did I just make a mistake? What do you think, my new friend, my tumor? Did you play a part in this relationship mishap, or was that all Suzanne, all me? I missed Feeney while we weren't communicating. You probably missed her too. I planned to leave town to visit my parents on December 18th, Feeney's birthday. The night before, I panicked after dinner. I wanted to glue my loose ends together before leaving town, and there were so many. I could fix this misunderstanding with Feeney if only I could release my stubbornness and just say, I'm sorry for being an asshole. I knew she would forgive me because she was Feeney. She was sweet and considerate. I knew she missed me as well. I knew she would want to get back to the gym, back to our lives, back to drinking coffee out of Esteban the Elephant mug at Melanie's, our favorite breakfast spot. Hey, I texted her, I'm sorry, I miss you. She wanted to talk the next morning before I left town, early, her birthday, the day final grades were due. I had all my grades turned in except for 3 students who needed extra time to finish their writing portfolios. There are always 3 or 4 who need extra time. So I packed the night before and planned to finish the grades before she showed up at the coffee shop where we agreed to meet. You were with me the whole time, Tumor, but I had no idea. I should have never felt lonely, never felt isolated or unloved. When you and I show up to the coffee shop, Tumor, we listen to the Bible study group discuss how Mary felt before delivering Jesus on Christmas Day. Naturally, I have so many issues with this. Sure, I believe in Jesus, but there is no fucking way he was actually born on December 25th. And I do not think for a moment that any of these Bible study people have a clue what Mary felt when schlepping around the professed world savior through some poorly lit night sky desert excursion, but whatever. There's a guy you and I call the philosopher, who keeps yammering about how the words witness and testimony basically mean the same thing, in Hebrew, but you and I have no reference for this. The Bible study group believes him, but seems annoyed that he cares so much about 2 words when the other group members want to talk about baby Jesus and nativity smelling of Carolina pines and how someone stole $40 from one of the ladies earlier that morning. Feeney and I worked through our misunderstanding almost immediately. You gave me no headaches, Tumor. No blurry vision. The worst you did. You presented me with a possessed leg that interrupts the shit out of that Bible study. Our Father who art, I think I have a Charlie horse in heaven. Hallowed be thy name. I don't understand why it's moving up my leg. Oh my God. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Oh my God, it won't stop moving up my leg. As earth as it is in heaven. Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh my God, my entire side, my hip in heaven. Amen. You fucking tumor became the brain of my leg, the exorcist of my right side. You demon, you piece of shit. The Bible study abandoned the ark of the coffee shop when my legs started swinging like an unwieldy clock hand. They packed their flimsy reproduction of ancient texts, their mittens, their stories about porcelain skin, baby Jesus, and left. One guy, not the philosopher, but more of a casual Jesus observer, assists Feeney in dragging me to the car. A flood of worry, doubt, and fear clouds my own prayers, my own understanding of the future told by stars. I do not touch my head. I do not touch you. All right, so this is from the middle, and this is also in Boone at the Physical Therapy Center. When I leave the hospital, I can walk without a walker or wheelchair. I wear an air cast on my right ankle and a foot-up brace that forces my toes to leave the floor when I stride. This prevents me from dragging my foot like a deer that's been run over but refuses to die. Now I'm in the wilderness, the wild, the woods. I still take the walker on excursions. Uneven terrain, even just the slight jut of a rock or cracked concrete, causes me to fear for my safety, to fear I might fall like an elderly person and break a hip, to fear I might trip over a rug or a carpet or an unexpected table leg and cause myself to need another surgery of some sort. People stare, of course. Bathrooms are difficult. Even the accessible restrooms have a door, and managing a door, a walker, and an uncooperative body is an effort worthy of a 2-hour nap. People refuse to move a little forward, a little backward, a little to the side. They likely believe I have a sports injury or I'm just clumsy. Still, after an SUV nearly flattens me like Roland Barthes, I begin to see how often people are assholes to the differently abled. For instance, a woman I will call Carol. I do not know her. I do not know her actual name. She wears no name tag or monogram materials. She just looks like a Carol. Before one of my physical therapy appointments in Boone, I drag myself into the waiting room and struggle to find a place to sit that will fit both myself and the walker. I carefully choose the chair across from Carol because I can A, sit in the chair, and B, put my walker in the space beside of it without disturbing anyone. This displeases Carol. She stares at me. Carol rolls her eyes. She huffs, she puffs. She wants to blow my walker down with her untamed wolfish eyebrows. I have fucking brain cancer, Carol. I don't say this, but I feel as if Carol reads my thoughts. She stands up without any assistance from a cane or walker or other device and struts to a new seat closer to the doors. Bye, Carol. Sure, I understand. I'm 36, but I look younger. I've been doing everything to make myself look presentable. Wearing makeup, putting on clean clothes, owning my half-shaved head as I have for the past 2 years I've had the haircut. Carol does not appreciate these attempts. I also appear, perhaps, as if I can function without my walker. I can, mostly. It's the mostly I fear. But if I drag my lame foot behind me just once and trip? What if that trip causes me to break my ankle or dislocate my knee? Carol did not witness my vacation to the bathroom where I left the walker outside of the stall and almost fell because the lights were off and I could not find the switch. I felt weightless, as if I was floating in space. I needed to find a comet, a star, a planet, something warm I could grasp. I located the light switch and steadied myself with a vanity table. I knocked off a potpourri container and retrieved the leaves from the floor. A flower girl in reverse. I've become quite good at bending my knees. Carol does not see this. I have brain cancer, Carol. I do not know how this happened, Carol. No one does. Not me, not my family, not my friends, not my doctor. Shit happens, Carol. I don't know what happened to you, Carol, but it must have been bad. Or maybe you have no support. No friends, no family left to help you. I don't know, but I do not assume. I am not like you, Carol. I am unlike the bad thoughts in your head. I am not sick, I am not sad, I am not angry. Please do not be angry, Carol. Please do not be angry. All right, this last one is my favorite. It's a story about an Uber driver named Ray. Winston-Salem. I've encountered an Uber driver named Ray a few times now. On my next to last day of radiation, Ray drives me to the cancer center. A fellow West Virginian, Ray and I both have eccentric fascination with the Hatfields and McCoys, and how many people believe them to be legendary and not actual families. They are real, Ray tells me. My wife descended from the Hatfields. They are educated people nowadays. They are school teachers, doctors, lawyers, but no one knows that. Just normal people, just like me and Ray. Ray readjusts his legs. I notice he's wearing a blue Snuggie with nothing underneath. His hairy bare thighs nearly bring my nausea back to life, but this is Ray. Ray is probably just doing his laundry today and does not give a shit. Ray does not threaten me, not at all. You know, you're a beautiful young lady, Ray says, and I think you're going to beat this. Ray also tells me he is a medical doctor. Or he was before he retired and started driving for Uber. For some reason, I believe Ray. I have no reason to. Ray is a storyteller. He's wearing a blue Snuggie and nothing else. His wife descended from one of the most outlawed families in the state of West Virginia. He might have been a doctor. He might have been a house painter. He might not even be an Uber driver. But I believe him because I need to. I believe him because I want to. I believe him because maybe I am in a dream and none of this is real. You're my favorite passenger ever, Ray tells me. At first, you were in my top 3, but you might be number 1 now. You may not believe me, but I said a prayer for you the other night. I think you're going to be okay. You are special. I'm certain Ray tells everyone this, but like I said, I believe him. I have to believe in someone, in something. You know, I had prostate cancer, Ray says. It's true. He told me this the other day. You know, I got the little tattoos so they could do the pinpoint radiation. Did you get those? They put them on my mask, I tell him. That way they didn't have to tattoo my face. Who would want to mess up that beautiful face? You know, I said you were in my top 3, but now you've moved up to be my favorite Uber passenger of all time. Thank you, Ray. Thank you. You know, my balls shrunk after radiation. I went from a rooster to a hen real fast. Oh, God. This is the most West Virginia thing I've ever heard, ever. I showed my doctor, and she didn't believe me at first. And then she saw my balls, and she said, "Good God, Ray, you're right. You went straight from a rooster to a hen." I drove that doctor crazy. Godspeed, Ray. May I see you again on my long journey to the end of this life, whenever that may be. Whenever my time comes, I will be ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Before we bring up our final speaker, our keynote speaker, I just want to give you a little bit of background about the space that we're in. So this is the house space. This space was purchased by the College of Fine and Applied Arts, I think 2 years ago. And they used a program on campus called the IDEX Lab to redesign the space and bring it new life and allow it to be used for programming like this and other events on campus. This used to be a car shop or car showroom. This is where the cars would sit, and below was a repair area for these places. And this is the original hardwood flooring in the building and everything. So we're really excited to be able to be in this space that has been around this area for a long time and give it new life and be able to have people come into this space and recognize the longstanding heritage and tradition just found in a building like this. So we're excited. Next up, and finally, we will have our keynote speaker, Dr. Joseph De Fante. Like I mentioned earlier, he was a former poet laureate in 2012 to 2014. He is a professor on App's campus, and he has written several books on poetry and done a lot of great work situating himself within Appalachia. So please welcome Joseph.
know the words, the way folks mouth, like speaking in tongues, and the spirit lays hold of her. Smudge on her cheek, second-hand coat, her blonde hair shone white in that light, aged to a coal miner's wife, or steel workers, like my mother. Before the 12th ship from Wheeling, Pittsburgh dragged in, I smelled asbestos and baker's green sizzle in my mighty Ohio beat by, whelped in Pittsburgh, it loops north in defiance of gravity, abruptly slices west, southering into the fang of northern West Virginia, and impales the border of Ohio and Pennsylvania like the long, jagged neck of a busted bottle. That's where we stood clinging to each other, stranded along the omniscient river where I still like to think of us before those miners, like escaped purgatorians, burst black and smoldering through the bottoms of our lives, and she started to cry, anticipating her father's patrician wrath. I thought of who I could call, knowing there was only one man on earth who would rise out of his exhausted sleep at the sound of my voice like Lazarus and come running. Of course, that man was my father, and he didn't say anything that night. In 2009, a journalist named Brian O'Neill published a book called The Paris of Appalachia. A bit of a derisive designation, O'Neill confesses in his title essay, hung on the city in which I was born and raised, Pittsburgh. The most interesting aspect of the book, and it's a bad book, is its title. Few Pittsburghers regard themselves as Parisians, though the cities and its outlying topography are unmistakably Appalachian. What's more, it fascinates me to know that Pennsylvania officially, and I hope this is still true, harbors more Appalachian geography than any other state in the Union. Pittsburgh, even without steel, remains a steel town. Steel town is a coal town. Steel and coal, Siamese twins, miners and steel workers united in the mythic forge of Prometheus. 40 years before O'Neill's book appeared, in 1969, when I was a junior at Pittsburgh Central Catholic High School, our student body formed the Appalachia Committee, and we raised, in conjunction with other schools, over $3,000 to send, along with cans of food, to Appalachia, though we pronounced it Appalachia. Our teachers, the Lasallian Christian Brothers and a band of bearded, long-haired, fire-breathing lay teachers, taught us about Harlan and the legendary bloody coal strikes. They showed us photographs of miners and their families. Every figure in photographs bade farewell. Blackened-faced miners, headlamps looming clairvoyant like third eyes from their battered helmets, the women's mouths set in anxious straight lines, the drop of their gaunt dresses, the querulous, beautiful, yearning faces of the children, baby birds whose portion lay underground in the gouged seam, infants swaddled in meager. The enigmatic Appalachian peaks in the distance, the gray line of stripped hardwoods, often the open-mouthed grimace of the shaft threshold, menacing, yet awe-inspiring in a terrible way. This is what poor people look like the photographs of my Italian ancestors. My father's father was a blacksmith, fresh through the stiles of Ellis Island, with only a bag of tools and a brood of babies to their names, in shock, amnesiac. I had not yet heard then, in 1969 of Appalachia, and it would be years before I learned how properly to say the word, and years more before I would come to live dreamily in its heart. This next poem is called House Hunting at 4,000 Feet. I had been in North Carolina for a long time, I don't know, 25 years or so, I think. And so when we moved to Boone, remains a life-changing experience and a novelty for me that will never wear off. Sure, it's just been, it really has been a dream. When we moved to Boone, we decided that we wanted to find the very highest place in Boone to live. So we were looking for all these places way the heck up in the middle of nowhere. And of course, people who live here know, well, I was told by a native Appalachian that only a fool wants to live on a ridge, you know, because your porch furniture and your dog and your children grow off of it. But what really happened is that we would take these crazy drives up, and our kids were still kind of young. When we would get to a point where we had no way to turn down. So I was literally backing down 2,000 and 3,000 feet of road with precipices on either side, and the children growing catatonic and deranged. So this is just called, it might be funny, the poem now at this point, but it wasn't at the time. It's called House Hunting at 4,000 Feet. The road's not but a ledge, near straight up shale and millstone mud. Good God, come winter. 3 slop-bellied brown and white bangtail paints cleat to a shelf in the mist. Then a bouquet of pink plastic roses stabbed in the scarf ahead of the fall off. By the time we find the house, fog set in, and we can't see to turn around, sheer on both sides. The children wear those silent, worried looks. They don't want to live in the sky, where a thing mishandled plummets the better part of a mile, and all there is for it is to cock an ear and reckon altitude by a whoop. Pray each time your foot touches earth, hold on like Hades. Folks up here born clubbing and slouch, perches spread well deep into them. The house is slant, blank, with enough give to weather gravity and us plumb Appalachian physics. We creep up and beam the brights on it. It eyes right back, querulous like a bedridden crone, but old man too. Finicky, the tin roof, a rusted skull cap, thick, watery glass windows, cataracted with silica, yellow dauber nests like sleep mortised into the panes. Up here is odd enough to make a house not just thingful, but a someone with blood and breath, secrets, voices. Some say you get used to it. Catamounts, fog, rime ice, the wind like Deuteronomy when it gets head up, snow beating down, shrinking everything in its alabaster cloud. We venture no further than the spinning, gnarling the busted porch, demur like the beholden Israelites and wait for a sign, our eyes discomfited by everlasting up. So maybe, gosh, I don't know, 6 years ago I did a collaboration with a photographer, a nature photographer named Carl Galen, and he had an exhibit at the Turchin, and in response to his photographs, which were just stunning, so I owe all of what came out of that Carl, I wrote poems, and they were all about mountaintop for the most part, which I kind of knew about, but then I immersed myself in the research of it and found out a lot more, all of which was shocking. The first poem I'll read is called Removing the Mountain from the Coal, which is of course a kind of paradox. We typically remove coal from the guts of a mountain, but what mountaintop removal does is sort of lobotomizes the mountain. You probably all know that, and then picks the coal out of the mountain and literally takes the mountain away from the coal. So again, this is called Removing the Mountain from the Coal. And the environmental fallout that comes as a result of mountaintop removal is just inestimable. North Carolina does not engage in mountaintop removal, but I don't know if this statistic is still true. At one time, it was the largest purchaser of mountaintop removed coal. War cross-hatching in slow motion, a bric-a-brac with switchback Z's. Their unearthed ruin in the clouds, the overburden in the valley. Something with not only the will, but the ordnance, ammonium nitrate to blow 400 meters off a mountain's frontal lobe of cortex, where memory once construed, its infinite vaults and archives, the oldest extant range on earth, a record of the moment on the third day of Genesis when Jehovah whispered, "Let the dry land appear," when the transcripts of what followed, even after, all of it gone, gray matter and emerald striated tear, black twinkle, vast impoundment, slurries lurk. Across the horizon, eastern Kentucky, Tennessee, all of West Virginia, into western Virginia, summits picket, massive reds and yellow autumnal fire, light breaks about their faces, understories flower. This is just a poem called Floyd County, Kentucky. It's a house. It's a photograph of a house that is close enough to the charges being laced in the mountain that the house literally shimmied and shook enough that its foundation cracked, and the house kind of cracked apart just because of the continuous detonation. Floyd County, Kentucky. No lintel to speak of, but a chicken wire screen door hinged on a 12-inch block and lattice, jittering, wind chimes knelling each time a charge grunts, off thunder rumbling the hollows. The masonry had been sound, shock split the seams, gashes mortar where it's been repointed, cocked sashes, number 2 pine gone ashy fixing the rot, the dooryard held in brazen peonies, rickety picket once white to corset them, pink red like a font in Luke where Jesus says to John, the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. Just inside hangs a woman's shawl, slick, see-through as onion skin. Maybe it's parchment, scrivened in bodement, the letters gone to blood. It can drive you to your knees, how folks set out flowers and look upon the earth. And this next one's called Post-Diluvian, Mingo County, West Virginia. There was a terrible, terrible flood that literally took out an entire neighborhood and overturned houses. And I hope the poem says a little bit about that. The day dawns repentant, sky blue. Union Mission hauls in food and blankets, toys. Pigeon Creek, now slaked, plumbing its banks, yet still flexing in its gouged shoulders, a sick, green-brown slabs of sunlight, dull as a gourd serpent. It's had too much to drown, more mine rain runoff than Mingo tribal land would suffer. Its breach was obscene, massing Diluvia bent on blood feud. Sycamore snapped in tandem, Royal stormed the house, cleaved its seams and sockets, white shakes skived in coils from its face. The pigeon in the children's room, counterpanes of water draping spinet and chifferobe. The roof caved the porch, the soapbox jackknife, joists gone for tinder. A good house, built righteously with gravity and optimism, signed verily in sacrifice and prophecy. It swamped, then sundered, vitals bared, the yard washed off to Pike County through the Tug River Valley, where the bones of the Hatfields and McCoys bristle in beds of coal silt, nary a crow circles. I'm looking for Africa. It's called Runoff. You know, a lot of this has to do with maybe it was the summer of 2013 when we had tons and tons of floods in Watauga County. And we've had a good few this year too, this summer. So when we live kind where I was kind of at the nexus of the valley, there's a lot of water that runs through there from lots of different directions. So what comes down out of those mountains via those streams is just astonishing and yield. Just stop. Runoff. Vast white sheets of hay bale, wrap, sail through the flume, like the mine stripped its beds and flung the linen, sluiced through a blown shaft, stupendous as clouds in the black spindrift to the runoff. Up Agnes Ridge, panicked Angus slew the flooded swale. Purple virgin's bower twined to rusted barbed wire rims and spumes. The sun, 93 million miles off, yet kin to water, created on the same day, appears behind the curtain of rain, everything at once antithetical. We pretend with the children that making for higher ground is a game. Born to elevation, gravity tugs them, lording above brims the slurry pond, quaking with raindrops. The Horton girl, not but 3, like reading from a ledger, names the swept up matter. Miss Shipley's iris, Isaac's whiffletree, Polly Ann's mule cart, Jordan's caddy, hubcaps, that vain vexed rooster of Galloway. The horde defies tallying. Goods wrested from folks who bled for them. The valley's oldest farm is underwater. The house, to its blue gable wings, fate Biddix's cabbage field flashes by, heads bobbing, a tale of epic slaughter. We cover the children's eyes and scurry for the knoll. So I'll read 3 more poems and get out of here. This is called Sentences. It has an epigraph from Diane Gilliam Fisher's miraculous book called Kettle Bottom. If you want to buy one book of poetry this year, you know, I say that every year. Every year you should buy Kettle Bottom by Diane. It's just, I mean, it's just too much. So this poem is called Sentences. And the epigraph from Diane's piece is, "It is true that it is the men that goes in, but is us that carries the mind inside." And this is also dedicated for Ernest Hill, who's a coal miner, and Jimmy Bell, who's actually a woman who wrote a book about coal mining and a terrible mining disaster at Windrock Mountain in Tennessee. Sentences. The work of rescue through Cumberland granite favors piety. The liturgy, pump and drill, dirge and hymn, the feudal knell, blade on stone. 9 days without respite, the tumult of hearts dredging hope overlong. The women are statues, mouths set in chiseled lines, gaunt dresses, the querulous, yearning faces of their children, baby birds, whose portion they swaddle in the ebon scene. At the shaft house they queue, awaiting the cage, finally, blue lips, black fingers, 9 days bearded, notes pinned to their blouses. These were not men beholding the words on a page, the flailing sentences their hands willed toward farewell, syllables tailing down and gently down, too faint to make out. And what these men did, and it's unbelievable, of course, is they knew they were going to die, and they wrote notes and pinned them to themselves. You know, their last act of bravery. It's just unbelievable. This poem is called Sundial, West Virginia, which is a town, the town of Sundial. And it's about Marsh Fork Elementary School, which was built kind of next door to a slurry pond, for instance. They built this horribly toxic, slurry pond, coal mine, dredging facility, almost next door to an elementary school. The incidence of illness and poisoned water and cancer and all those kinds of things became so prevalent. I mean, they finally moved the school, but it took a while. Sundial, West Virginia. Children take sick from powdered coal, loaded into freight cars by a silo half a soccer field from their Marsh Fork schoolyard, then doused with bonding agents to suppress the dust. 1,200 feet above their cubbies hovers an earthen dam. Behind it, bibbed the gray impoundment, 2.8 billion gallons coal sludge. From the gouged peaks of dural, lobotomized, serpentine switchbacks weave a cat's cradle into the grave rooms. Snared in the hourglass instead of sand, slurry trickles. Kids convert feet into meters, gauge the rate which rain falls, the agonizing pace of drizzle. They study terminal velocity, the likely speed of a downslope flash flood loosed from a suddenly ruptured levee. Memorize the periodic table of chemical elements. Commit to their vocabulary: watershed, toxic, overburden, subsidiary, arsenic, mercury, chromium, cadmium, boron, nickel, selenium. They pledge allegiance, return thanks in lunch hall, at recess, skip rope, play jacks, Johnny on a pony, sing Little Red Caboose. Their primer is gravity. The first bell signals barely this side of glory. Sundial casts its shadow in the hour. And I'll read one last poem. I'll read a poem called Light at the Seam. This is actually what this talk was titled, that I had to have a title. And often we do that and then pay no attention to what you say you're supposed to do, which you forget, but I think that's sort of and this is just called Light at the Seam. It's after one of Carl's just amazing photographs. It's just, just very beautiful. It's the sun coming out of this incredible fog. We see it here, those foggy mornings, and then the fog dissipates, and the sun comes out. Maybe a million times more glorious if it hadn't been shrouded to begin with. So a day that you think is not going to be much of a day is suddenly serendipitously a miracle. So this is called Light at the Seam. This is the afterlife, threshold of oblivion, a blacktop crest on Pine Mountain, Bell County, Kentucky, U.S. Route 119, burning north through the heart of coal until it plays out frozen in Du Bois, PA. Out of gauzy lavender fog, the wakened sun swoons in white robes. Jesus, flanked by Moses and Elijah, transfigured up into a high mountain apart, deep within, miners suspire, shake light at the sea. Thanks very much.
Okay, if y'all just give us 30 seconds, we're going to get set up for the Talkback panel really quickly. Yeah, can you help me? Yeah, can the speakers come up as well? Keep until it fits. And facilitating the talkback, we have Catherine Ledford. She is a professor on Apps campus as well, and she's done a lot of work in this region and on this region as well. So she'll be doing some contextualizing for the event, as well as communicating with our speakers about their thoughts and how this event has, or how their stories have been situated within Appalachia. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
If y'all will just pass this off to each other.
Okay. All right. So good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much. Matt and Jake, and is it Jake? Oh my gosh, okay, for a second I had a panic attack. I thought I was calling you the wrong name. Thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to be here this evening. What a wonderful celebration and kickoff of this series, and I'm anticipating many good years in the future of this event, because it really does build on, I love the paper here that contextualizes this for us and speaks about the long-standing tradition of storytelling in this region, and that it really behooves us here at Appalachian State University to celebrate that and to continue that. I also think it's great that we're on campus, but not quite. We're in a campus facility, but we're right here in Boone as well. So I know one of the goals of this project is to have the community be a part of this event, not not just campus community, but other folks in Boone and in Watauga County. So I'm going to speak just real briefly because I know we have lots of questions and follow-up and comments that would love to speak to these wonderful storytellers about. But just real briefly, again, my name's Catherine Ledford. I'm a faculty member in the Appalachian Studies program here on campus. And every semester I teach an undergraduate class, a Gen Ed class, in our Appalachian Mountains theme in Gen Ed. And the class I teach is called Appalachian Stories. So this is just a perfect opportunity. A few of my students are in here from those classes. But in that class, what we do is we begin each semester with Cherokee oral narratives. And in addition to poetry and drama and fiction, short stories and novels, we also read memoir. We read travel writing, a couple of mentions of the early travelers through the region. We read slave narratives. We read just anything and everything. Labor song, we don't have any musicians here tonight, but labor songs, protest song lyrics, all of that. So I love that this collection of folks this evening really touches on many of those elements of the Appalachian storytelling experience. So the narratives from Cherokee Traditions, I really encourage you folks, if you're intrigued by the stories that were told here today, if you would like to hear some Cherokee voices, there are plenty of those online. But James Mooney collected a early 20th century publication. He was an self-taught ethnographer from born in the 19th century, and James Mooney collected Cherokee oral narratives. Those are available free online. Just go and Google his name, and you'll be taken to a website that has just tons of examples of stories that our Cherokee neighbors told in and about this region. And then just real briefly, I'd like to highlight the wonderful tradition of jack tales. We didn't have an example of a jack tale tonight, but we could not be in Watauga, Avery County around here without mentioning that wonderful treasure. Maybe in the future we could have some tellers come in with the jack tale tradition. In the mid part of the 20th century, scholars and collectors discovered that here in Beech Mountain, the Hicks and Harmon families on Beech Mountain here in Watauga and Avery counties had been carrying on a tradition of jack tale telling. Jack tales emerged from European traditions, medieval European traditions. Not just in England, but also in Wales and in France. There are some German jack tales, a long tradition, and those have been brought over with settlers to the region. We heard some of our folks this evening mentioning those early settlers to our region, and those stories had persisted, and families had continued to tell those tales, those jack tales, and they were collected in the in the middle part of the 20th century. And so our region really entered national and international attention for that treasure that we had in this place and that we continue to celebrate. Jonesboro, Tennessee, just over the mountain, started in the early 70s. The storytelling festival over there that developed, they now have an international storytelling headquarters over in Jonesboro, Tennessee. Love Tennesseans, so I'll give them a little plug there. But Jonesboro, a wonderful place over there that draws international attention. So one of the things that maybe we could start our discussion and commentaries on is one thing that I noticed was a real building of community. Among these folks, we have examples of poetry, we have memoir, we have examples of personal experience, personal narrative, and a real building of community amongst these people, discussion of their families, right, and the role that families, parents, grandparents, children, aunts, uncles, moving to this region, adopting this region, being from this region, all of that stuff flowing through these stories this evening. So with that, I will hush so that we can get these voices back and bring your voices into this conversation as well. So you two stop me when you think gone enough here on your timeline, but I'd just like to open the floor for questions, comments for our storytellers this evening. Anybody have questions or comments? Don't leave me hanging up here. My students already did that this morning, so I had to listen to crickets in class, so don't do it to me again. Questions or comments for our storytellers?
I have a question
Oh,
for Joseph.
sure.
Did you
Should I? Sorry, we're going to try to make sure the computer can hear us.
We are down in the valley. Yeah, no, we didn't. We didn't.
Too scary.
It was too scary. Yeah, yeah. Nobody wanted to live there. You know, everybody's too afraid. You know.
So I wish I was as creative and articulate as everybody up there. Could you each talk a little bit about the creative process? Like, why do you write? What is it like for you? What does it do for you? As you know, for somebody who does not write poetry, does not write stories, I'm interested in that creative process as a sampling.
Well, I'll start down here.
Thanks. That's what I get for sitting on the end.
I've never felt so self-important sitting up here. So I know some humility is going to come later on tonight. I don't feel like this is on. I don't know.
For the video.
Is it for the video? Okay, great. So it's just ceremonial.
It's not ceremonial, it's for the video.
So I was just kidding. So my creative process is really self-indulgent and pretty much makes me feel good. So no, I write because I mean that is a big portion of it. I mean for me, I started writing when I read East of Eden by Steinbeck, and it's for those who don't know or haven't read it, it's a thinly veiled autobiography, sort of the families that lived in the Salinas Valley. And being from Appalachia, I mean, sort of from Appalachia, spending a lot of time up here, I can relate to that. I can relate to being on the land and having. I mean, my family has a farm in Asheville that they've had for 180 years, you know, and so I related a lot with that, and I related to a lot of the stories of the people. And so for me, there was something very satisfying about telling these people's stories. And it wasn't kind of like a voice for the voiceless thing. It was more like I just was satisfied doing this. There was this sort of maybe there was a need to tell it. There was a need like capturing like a photograph or a painting or something like that. And the better I got at it, not as I'm any good now, but the better I got at it, the more satisfying it was. It was like a perfect picture capturing these memories. And so even if they didn't mean anything for anybody else, it meant something for me, and I could look back at them like a photo album or something like that, you know? So that was really my impetus. And there's a lot of reasons why I write, but that was really my impetus, I think, and still keeps me going. So self-indulgence.
All right. I think all story helps us organize the chaos of our everyday reality. And for me, you know, I never really expected to be in Appalachia. I did have horrifying images of what Appalachia was like, and I just wanted to kind of organize. You know, we have people who come, like when his brother came from for New Year's Eve last year, the first thing he did was play dueling banjos. And I think that there's such ignorance of this region that I really want to reach out and try to explain to people. It's way more complex than we all think it is, who don't come from here. And I just have been it's been such a lovely discovery to understand that Appalachia is far more than the stereotypes that I wanted to share that.
Yeah, I think that I write too because, like Joshua said, because of self-indulgence in a lot of ways. So I was an English major, and so well, yeah, you know, I mean, so I was an English major, so you read a lot of books, and you admire a lot of books, and you love a lot of books. And it's a little bit like, too, if you grew up watching a lot of sports, and you liked a lot of sports, you decide you want to try and play the game. And it was more like that for me, you know. I read these books, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be neat if I could kind of do this? So, you know, I just started writing, and I started writing badly, and I always like to say, then I got less bad and less bad and less bad. But the other thing is, this is probably one of the big writing cliches, but I think it's true. You never really know what you think until you formalize it into language, and you formalize it in another level when you actually write it down and you see. Robert Lowell has this poem where he says, "My eyes saw what my hand did." And so there's a kind of amazing recognition, I think, about how you really think. And I guess for me, too, I don't lie when I write. I try not to lie terribly in my real life, but I also don't know how people can get through their lives without lying. So, but I don't lie in writing. So I think that's what it was. I saw these books, I read these books, and I just wanted to mimic it. It was so romantic. It was like, I don't know, playing shortstop for the Pirates or something. Maybe not quite that amazing, but.
I think I kind of had the same perspective Dr. De Fante just ranted about a little bit, that I grew up journaling. I had been journaling since I could write. I was actually speech delayed for a long time, but I was writing. And I think that was really where, seeing what my hand wrote. I can't explain how many times it has happened where I don't really understand what's going through my mind until I take my journal and write it down. And for me, it's just been that simple. There's never really an onslaught of inspiration and going perhaps past what I'm experiencing them in that moment. I don't think about the mountaintop removals or the things that I've heard tonight. These really, really intricate metaphors. I kind of just think about perhaps self-indulgent things and understanding my own consciousness.
So I come from a very musical family, but I have no musical talent. So if you've ever been to a square dance in West Virginia, you've met my family. It's a very large group of people playing fiddles, banjos, singing, but I couldn't do any of that. And so one day, one of them asked me, "Well, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I write." And, "Oh, okay, well, that works. That's artsy enough." A lot of people grow up in sports-minded families, and I never did, but I had to do something to survive in my family. So I had to have something that kind of helped me fit into that large group of crazy samples people. So writing became my thing. And then, when I woke up from brain surgery, I was like, I need a reason to survive. And that was my reason to keep moving and to keep surviving and to keep going I never planned on writing a memoir. Like I said, it's the craziest thing. It's like reading your diary in front of a bunch of strangers. But that became my reason to wake up in the morning, and my reason to learn to walk again, and my reason to get through physical therapy was so I could write. And so it's a means of survival for me.
Great, thank you. Do we have other questions or comments? Is your book available?
Yes, it's available online, and then you can ask for it at Foggy Finds, which I prefer because support your local bookstore.
I'm not good at passing this mic off. This is confusing. So yeah, other comments or questions for the group? Yeah.
So for people who didn't specifically speak about Appalachia or the history of being in this region, how do you think being in this region has influenced your storytelling or your performance, your writing, anything like that? Because I know Hannah spoke a little bit about how that's not how she situates it, but I'm sure this region has affected that somewhat.
Anybody want to take that one on?
I would just say that, I grew up in the North, but I've lived most of my life in the South, in North Carolina. I mean, far and away, 2/3 of my life, maybe more. And so one of the great things about moving to the South for me, I mean, apart from meeting my wife, is a Southerner, by the way, was just having all of my senses retrained by another place, a new vocabulary, the kind of the literal music of the place, but the music of the speech, the skies, the scapes, the customs, the food, all of that infiltrated my writing in wonderful ways. And so then to move to Appalachia, there was another layer of language, custom, culture, food, music, another ethos. I remember being in the Iredell County Public Library one time, and somebody asked Fred Chappell, the great Fred Chappell. If you don't know his work, I mean, he grew up in Haywood County in Canton, North Carolina. Lee Smith, of all people, called him our resident genius, and he really is. So somebody asked Fred Chappell to talk about being a Southern writer, and he really bristled and said, I am not a Southern writer, I'm an Appalachian writer. And in the distinction at that point, I don't think I understood there was a distinction, but now I do understand that distinction, and I don't know, it's just... Well, I suppose, the climate, the elevation, the crops, a kind of ethos. Maybe people who grew up in Appalachia could speak a little more to that, and that might be an interesting thing to even talk about. I mean, for me, it was another South within the South that I really didn't understand, and I'm still, yearning to understand even more the longer I live here. But he was kind of indignant, like I ain't no Southern writer, I'm an Appalachian writer, and I heard him loud and clear on that. There's a real pride there. I don't know. Josh, difference between is that something interesting? The difference between the South and Appalachia? I don't know that I'm the best to.
I mean, of course, I grew up in West Virginia, which is the only state that's completely in Appalachia. So, I grew up knowing that West Virginia really didn't fit into the North or the South. And so as a youth, I kind of struggled to define that. I wanted to know, I wanted an answer, where was I from? What did this mean to me? And so Appalachia became the answer to that. And, it was easily defined for me because I grew up within the culture as well, a lot of music. My family plays old-time mountain music, which is not bluegrass music. It's totally different. And so these things were very apparent to me. I grew up eating pepperoni rolls, and no one, maybe Matt knows what those are, I don't know. But it's like a different kind of food, a different kind of lifestyle. And I knew that, Appalachia was kind of different than anywhere else that I knew, but instead of balking against that, I really wanted to embrace that. And yeah, it's a great place, so why not embrace it?
I guess I have always kind of interpreted the environment around me to be more dependent on what I'd like to perceive. So maybe not what I'd like to perceive, but what I'm forced to perceive. The rain, or the emotional circumstances surrounding the people in my life. So while Appalachia, I have loved the school, and I think I've learned so much here and really loved the environment. It hasn't really influenced my writing in maybe the same ways that it has other people, because it's never really forced me to notice it. Anyone else?
Yeah, Joshua?
Yeah, I think we've kind of covered a lot of our different nuanced ideas of what Appalachia is, and like for you, it's music and culture, and for me, I think it encompasses all these things, but it's more poignant for different aspects of it. Like for me, it's attachment to the land, and whereas maybe and I don't think it's just in Appalachia, because I lived in Ireland for a little while, and Ireland, like rural Ireland, resembles Appalachia so much, and especially like in rural Ireland, if you walk half a mile in any direction, you'll come across a different dialect, and I think in a lot of ways it's similar to here, and different traditions and that sort of thing. But they're all united, of course, by certain pinpoints, like one being the land. But for me, I think especially learning to love and appreciate a single place. I'm Roman Catholic, and for a while I was discerning kind of religious vocation, and there's a sect of Roman Catholicism called the Benedictines, and they live in a monastic lifestyle, and one of the vows that they take is a vow of stability, which means that they will never leave that one plot of land for their entire lives. And what the purpose of that is to kind of breathe life into an area through prayer and work and that sort of thing. And I think of that a lot with a lot of the rural farms that I pass, and my family's own farm, and there's a certain life and vivacity to staying on one place for a long period of time and raising a family, and like my great-grandfather actually dying on a farm, or my grandfather being born there, you know? And it's a great mystery, and I don't quite know what it is, but I think it kind of penetrates all of Appalachia, and that kind of, for me, informs a lot of what it means to be an Appalachian, so.
Question? Well, if not, let me give 2 shout outs. I see Dr. Sandra Ballard lurking around the corner there. So Sandra Ballard, wave your hand up. So if you are intrigued by these stories this evening, Sandy is the editor of Appalachian Journal here on Air Campus, started in the English department in 72. And Sandy Ballard took it over as editor in 2000, and she publishes academic work, but also poetry. Some wonderful poetry published in Appalachian Journal, so check out Appalachian Journal. Sandy is also the editor of a collection, a wonderful, amazing collection, anthology of Appalachian stories. I believe Anne had mentioned that she hadn't had the privilege of reading a lot of Appalachian stories before she came here, and there are plenty out there. So Sandy Ballard's anthology, it's called Listen Here, and it's all women telling stories, writing stories about Appalachia. Big old thick book from the University of Kentucky Press, and a wonderful anthology. So check out both of those. And I have the privilege, look for it in 2020, the University of Kentucky is publishing an anthology of Appalachian literature, and we're going to give Sandy's anthology a run for its money. It's going to be just about as thick, I believe, about 800, 900 pages of Appalachian literature, more stories to listen to. Not listen to, it's not on audio. You got to read them with your eyeballs. But it goes all the way from Cherokee oral narratives up to today. So lots of stories out there, a whole variety of stories, just like we've been hearing this evening from many different genres. So do either Matt or Jacob, do you want to say a last word and close this out and tell them what the next steps are?
So I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. This was a really great event. I am so glad all of you came, and we are really excited to continue to do this, definitely for next year. If you're interested in being involved with this, you can come talk to myself, Dr. Matt Richards, Beth Holcomb, anybody that I mentioned and brought up here this evening. As for next steps, so it was a little bit of a hiccup. Food services put in next Tuesday as the food date instead of this evening. So we do not have a reception in this space. I'm very apologetic about that. That being said, a few of us will be going to the local across the street to have an informal reception afterwards. Informal. Because we need it at this point. So thank you all. If you are welcome to come into that space and join us as well, we can do more discussion. It'll be more just kind of friendly chit-chatting and that kind of thing. But thank you all for coming out. This has been amazing.